work. Let's look at some AML due diligence frequently asked questions. The AML regime, as I'm sure you'll all know, changed with effect from June 26th last year. The big change, I think, generally for professional firms was the requirement for you to have a firm level risk assessment, where perhaps before the risk assessment was very much done at the individual client level at take on and going forward. What you've now got to have is a firm level risk assessment. I'm not going to make a big play of that on this session. I would say that from the firm's point of view, my sense has been initially that could be a real chore and initial process. But I think where the benefit can be with your firm level assessment, there's also good guidance out there about how that might be approached. I would say it will inform your due diligence work at an individual client level, including your assessment of risk. And I think as well, it could be very helpful in terms of internal training. Because if someone in the firm sat back and thought about how we as a firm exposed to money laundering, cascading that message to members of the team puts them in a good place to be clear what they're looking for and what they might report through to the reporting officer. But that's certainly the big thing I've been talking about a lot on courses on AML this last year or so. That all being said, I would say that the key thing people are more worried about is some of the detailed questions around due diligence at the point of individual client take on. And what I wanted to do is just talk about a few of the issues, and if I could, dispel one or two myths. And here we are. Yeah, I mean, this is amazing how people get really into the detail on this stuff. And I think where the concern has arisen, people are perhaps a bit more forensic in the way they review the professional guidance coming out, is the CCAB guidance for our sector is slightly differently framed under the new regime compared to what it was framed under the old regime. And that therefore prompts lots of detailed questions around, do I currently have enough and do I need to do more? Is there more focus on photographic ID? Well, there is. I think if you look at the appendix to the CCAB guidance on the AML regime, it definitely makes a bigger play of if you're looking at individual clients and you're doing due diligence checks in more of a traditional way, that you'd be really more inclined to have, I suppose, sort of photographic ID than perhaps you would have previously. But my take on that one is quite simply that I think the world's moved on since the previous CCAB guidance back in 2007. And there's perhaps more of an expectation now that you'd be more likely to have photographic ID for the vast majority of individuals, where perhaps back in 2007, maybe not so much. So my big thing about the photographic ID thing, I don't think there's any real massive change in the approach here. But the phrasing's slightly different, and that's therefore put a few people on guard as to what they've currently got for existing clients and long-standing clients may not be enough. Moving on then from there to number two, if no photographic ID were available, would that be a deal breaker? I think with that one, I've always said it does depend on why that photographic ID is not available. So if your client's being very reluctant, very reticent to provide that photographic ID, that might well put you on guard. But if it's generally the case that the photographic ID is not available for very simple reasons, then actually that might be fine. ICW did an example years ago called the little old lady example. So you're acting for a little old lady who lives in a nursing home. She's never had a driving license, never had a passport. Can you act? And they talked about in that example back in the day, could you maybe look at maybe a letter from the home, from her doctor, asserting that she is who she purports to be. Little old ladies, as they said at that time, are rarely money launderers. You'd be surprised, delegates say. But certainly for that one, I would say the ethos is very much as it ever was. You've got to be thinking about why that's not available, but actually, if it's a very sensible, simple reason, then move on. Are they who they purport to be? That's the key thing. And just getting over the line on that sometimes is the key thing, not worrying too much about the detail around exactly what form that documentary evidence would take. Moving on then to question three, no expectation in my mind that you will, for long-standing clients that perhaps previously you complied with the old CCAB guidance and not got photographic ID, that you'll now seek it. That's something which, again, I think the whole ethos here is very much as it was before. I don't think the individual client level there's a massive change in what we're looking for. Question four, there was certainly some rulings around a few years ago. It said in terms of the actual copies you take of passports, driving licenses, that colour copies were not allowed. That's now changed. Okay, so again, colour copies are fine, not a problem with that. That came in a few years ago and is not an issue, although it does crop up quite a bit. The CCAB guidance specifically does say that you do need to certify copies that you retain of those sort of documents as copies of an original that you've seen. It was always best practice. It's a little bit more nailed on now. So again, the person doing the checks would need to see the actual paperwork. They'd take a copy, and then you would certify that as a copy of the original that you've seen. The fact it's a bit more nailed on does not necessarily mean you wouldn't have done it before. Without doubt, I would say in terms of question 6, many firms are moving more towards the electronic databases for due diligence information, and that removes the need for the formality and the chore really of gathering, documents and taking copies. But again, a number of firms I've spoken to have said that they've been told by these providers of these databases that actually that's the way you're going to have to go. It's just not true. If you'd rather go for the traditional method, absolutely fine. But actually, they can be very efficient. I guess all that you would tend to find the relevant guidance would talk about here is, are you using a reputable provider, and are their databases appropriately regularly updated? So if you're using a recommended ACCA, ICAS, ICW database, you're in a good place. But no obligation there if that's not the way that you'd like to go. We get tons of questions about number 7. Can I, if the client's met me in their home and I haven't got a scanner with me, can they scan a copy across later? If I'm not physically meeting the client face to face, could I have a situation whereby we're doing a Skype call and they hold up the passport in front of the camera so I can see it and then scan a copy across later? I think, to my mind, I'm very flexible about that sort of stuff. The question is, are they who they purport to be in your mind as a professional? And are you happy that the copy you've got is a copy of the original which that person put in front of the screen? So I think we get questions around that. I think pragmatism and common sense needs to prevail there. Obviously, these days, increasingly, firms do not always need clients face-to-face, and those sort of workarounds, I think, are totally appropriate. That, in a way, maybe is where the electronic databases are probably very helpful, because they remove the sort of the chore of getting the traditional methods complied with. And does anything change regarding ongoing? No, it really doesn't. We always say that in terms of regulatory visits, the things they'll look for is, they'll get a sample of your clients and say, okay, have you actually done an initial risk assessment? Have you got verification evidence off the back of that? Have you reassessed risk periodically? And have you got further verification evidence off the back of that reassessment of risk? And if you haven't followed those 4 steps through for all of your clients, then you're not going to be in a good place. I would say that for firms that have got lots of clients, don't have a 2-day lockdown every year where you reassess risk for every single one of them. Do it as you go along and then build it into your procedures. But those 4 elements really, I think, are very key. But again, in terms of the verification evidence you'll seek off the back of that, people often say, if my client's passport has expired, do I need to get a new copy of the new one? And I think categorically not. If you're happy they are who they purport to be, and that passport copy was authenticated at the point of original take on, I think there's no need to then get an updated copy when it's reissued. But certainly, ongoing is the area for regulators they're very hot on. Firms aren't as good at it. And as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the new regime, there's no substantive change at all there coming in. So again, just be aware of that as a recurring issue going forward. Okay, so that's just running through a few of those very nitty-gritty questions. As I say, quite interestingly, I think that's not the big deal with AML. I think the big deal with AML is the firm level assessments, but that's where we get all the queries, and hopefully for some of you in professional practice, that's providing some clarity about 1 or 2 things that are relevant at the current time. And that's AML due diligence frequently asked questions.